Before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something. There are moments in life, rare, violent, clarifying moments, where everything you've been told about strength, rank, and respect gets stripped away, where the world stops performing and starts being brutally honest, where you find out, in front of everyone, exactly who you are. I was a woman in a room full of men who had already decided I didn't belong there. And I had about 45 seconds to prove that 300 years of military tradition had gotten one thing catastrophically wrong. This is not a story about being the best. This is a story about what happens when someone pushes you to the edge and you realize the edge was never where you thought it was. The smell hit me before anything else. Jet fuel, salt water, and something metallic I'd later learn was the particular scent of institutional arrogance. It clung to the air inside Coronado Naval Base like a second coat of paint, invisible, permanent, and completely unbothered by your opinion of it. I stepped off the transport at 0530 hours, and the Pacific was doing what the Pacific always does in November, turning itself into something cold and gray and indifferent. My boots hit the tarmac, and I hauled my pack over my shoulder, and for exactly 2 seconds, I let myself feel the full weight of what I'd done to get here. 2 years of tactical language training. 14 months embedded with the 82nd Airborne as a cultural liaison officer. A battlefield citation I never asked for after an operation in the Karangal Valley that I will carry in my chest for the rest of my life. And a direct recommendation from Colonel Priya Dillon, one of the most decorated intelligence officers the Army had produced in a decade, that I be selected as the first female advisor ever formally embedded with a SEAL team on active rotation. 2 seconds. Then I picked my chin up and walked. The briefing room was in Building 7, which sounds straightforward until you realize Coronado's Building 7 is about as welcoming as a dentist's office designed by someone who hated teeth. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a projector screen with a coffee ring stain in the corner that had clearly been there since the Clinton administration, and 267 SEALs. I knew the number because Master Chief Yates told me on the way in. He was my point of contact, assigned to smooth my integration, which was a diplomatic way of saying he had been tasked with making sure I didn't get eaten alive. "Don't make eye contact with Kowalski," he murmured as we walked through the door. "And don't laugh at anything Torres says until you know which jokes he's serious about." "Which ones is he serious about?" "All of them," Yates said, without a trace of humor. "He's from New Jersey." I walked in, and the room did not go quiet. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I'd spent the drive oversteeling myself for silence, for that dramatic, cinematic hush that happens in movies when the outsider enters the room. Instead, it was loud, men talking over each other, the particular chaotic baritone of a room full of people who are very good at being loud without meaning to be. Tactical vests hanging off chairbacks. Someone passing around what smelled like an entire pot of bad coffee in a single thermos. 3 guys near the back arguing about something that involved hand gestures, and the word definitively used about 9 times too many. And then someone saw me. It rippled. Not silence, something worse. A kind of deliberate, performed noticing, like a wave moving through the room, heads turning, conversations dying not in a quiet but into that particular frequency of whispered commentary. I'd heard it before. In Kandahar, in the hallways of the Pentagon, in every room where my presence was considered a statement someone else was being forced to read. I found a seat in the 3rd row, sat down, pulled out my notebook because I was going to take notes in this briefing whether anyone liked it or not, and I was going to be professional about it, and I was absolutely not going to let my hand shake. My hand shook a little. "Captain Reyes." I looked up. He was standing 6 rows back, and slightly to my left, tall, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something dense and self-satisfied. His name patch read Kowalski. Of course it did. "This is SEAL Team Orientation," he said. "Intel Corps is down the hall." The room laughed. Not all of it, maybe a third, but it was enough. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked back down at my notebook and wrote the date at the top of the page. "I know," I said. "I'm in the right room. I'm sure you think you are." More laughter. Torres, I assumed, added something from the back that I didn't quite catch, but that earned a whoop from the guys around him. Yates was watching me from the corner of the room with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite apologetic. More like a man watching someone defuse a bomb and trying to decide whether to offer help or just stay very still. The briefing officer, Commander Ellis, walked in at that point, and the room settled. Ellis was the kind of person who generates authority the way some people generate static electricity, constantly, effortlessly, and slightly uncomfortably for everyone in the vicinity. He was about 50, with the economical build of someone who had done serious physical work for 30 years and saw no reason to stop. He set down his folder, looked around the room. His gaze landed on me for exactly 1 second longer than anyone else, and then moved on. "Listen up," he said, "because I'm saying this once. Captain Maya Reyes is embedded with Alpha rotation for the duration of Operation Glasswall. She has full operational clearance, advisory standing, and the direct ear of CENTCOM through Colonel Dillon's office. Anyone who has a problem with that can file a complaint in writing, which will be read with great interest and then recycled." He looked up. Questions. Nobody asked anything, but Kowalski leaned over to the man beside him and said something, and I saw it. Not loud enough for Ellis to catch, but plenty loud enough for me. And what he said was, "That's cute." I wrote it down, not because I was going to report it, because I had learned a long time ago that writing something down is how you stop it from living rent-free in your skull. The briefing itself was dense. Operation Glasswall was a multi-phase extraction mission, a compromised asset network in the Eastern Mediterranean, a ticking clock on a safe house that had likely already been burned, and an intelligence gap that was going to require someone with my particular skill set to bridge. I was there because I spoke 3 regional dialects fluently and because I had spent 14 months building relationships with local networks that the SEALs would never have access to through conventional channels. I was there because I was genuinely necessary. I kept telling myself that during the briefing. It helped. Afterward, the room broke into informal clusters. Ellis pulled me aside for a quick word. Logistics, contact protocols, a satellite update window, and by the time we were done, most of the room had cleared out. Only a handful of guys remained, gathered near the door in that way that means they're waiting for something. I packed my notebook, pulled on my jacket. Hey, Kowalski, still there. He had 2 other men with him, Torres, who was shorter and wiry, and watching me was something that wasn't quite hostility, more like aggressive curiosity, and a third man I didn't have a name for yet, big and quiet, standing slightly apart. Real talk. No offense. Something tells me offense is incoming, I said. How many ops have you actually run? Field ops. Not briefings. Not translation support. Actual boots on the ground. 11, I said. 4 of which were classified at a level you don't have clearance for. That landed differently than he expected. I saw it in the slight recalibration around his eyes. Still, he said, you've never run with SEALs. No, I agreed. I haven't, so you don't know how we work. I know how most people work, I said. I'm a quick study. Torres made a sound that might have been a laugh. Kowalski's jaw tightened. On the ground, he said, when things go sideways, and they will go sideways, you don't want to be the weak link. For your sake, and ours. It was almost reasonable. Almost the kind of thing you could argue wasn't hostile, just honest. That was the insidious part of it. The way it wore the costume of concern. I appreciate that, I said. Genuinely. And I'll remember it when things go sideways. I picked up my bag, started for the door, and then Kowalski said it. Get on your knees, and thank God they let you in here, Reyes. Because out there, someone's going to have to carry you. The room, what remained of it, went still. I stopped walking. There was a moment. One of those moments I mentioned at the beginning, rare, violent, clarifying. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I could hear the fluorescent light buzzing. I could feel the weight of every hour I'd spent, bled, sacrificed, compromised, and survived to stand in this room with this clearance and this purpose compressed into about 3 seconds of very controlled breathing. Then, I turned around. I looked at Kowalski. I looked at Torres. I looked at the quiet man whose name I didn't know yet. I looked at the half-dozen others in the room who were very carefully studying the floor, the ceiling, their own hands, anywhere but at me. Let me tell you something, I said, and my voice came out level because I had trained it to come out level in situations significantly worse than this. I have been on the ground in 4 countries where the wrong word in the wrong dialect gets people killed. I have walked into rooms where the men inside were trying to decide whether to shoot me or recruit me, and I have walked back out of those rooms with intelligence that saved American lives. Lives some of the people in this building went home to. I have done this without a weapon, without backup, without the option to radio for extraction. I let that sit. So, when you tell me to get on my knees, I said, what I hear is that you've run out of actual arguments. I turned back toward the door. The quiet man near the back, the one I didn't have a name for, he was looking at me now. And what was on his face was not what I expected. It was the beginning of something that looked a great deal like respect. His name, I would find out later, was Sergeant First Class Daniel Okafor. And he was going to save my life in approximately 72 hours. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that I walked out of Building 7 with my notebook and my jacket and my shaking hands, and I did not cry until I was inside my bunk with the door closed, and even then it was quiet, and even then it only lasted 45 seconds, and even then I got up afterward and reviewed the mission brief for 2 hours because there was work to do, and no amount of Kowalski in the world was going to stop me from doing it. Outside, the Pacific kept being cold and gray and indifferent. I respected that about it. The next morning began at 0430, which in Coronado in November means it begins in the dark. I was in the team bay at 0415, running gear checks in the quiet, which is the kind of thing you do when you want to make it very clear that you're not scrambling, you're not catching up, you're already there. Yates found me at 0420. You made an impression, he said, which was how I knew it had traveled. Kowalski, half the base by now. He poured himself some of the terrible coffee, looked at it, poured some more. For what it's worth, Okafor hasn't said much to anyone this whole rotation. Quiet guy, professional, stays in his lane. Apparently, he said something to Torres this morning. What did he say? Yates looked at me. He said, I want her on my breach team. I went back to checking my gear. But I let myself feel it, quietly, privately, in the chest, because sometimes you need to let yourself feel the small things, or the big things will drown you. The mission brief update was at 0600. The satellite window had shown movement around the safe house. Not conclusive, but suggestive. The asset network was making encrypted contact using a cipher protocol I had helped develop during my Kandahar rotation. I was the only person in the building who could interpret the authentication sequence embedded in what looked like routine traffic. That changed the timeline. We had 48 hours, not 72. We were going in early into a situation with less confirmed intelligence than anyone was comfortable with, which was unfortunately standard for every operation I'd ever been part of that actually mattered. The contact sequence, Commander Ellis said, looking at me across the table, you're certain. The second embedded phrase references a conversation I had with the primary asset 18 months ago in a safe house outside Nicosia. A conversation that was never written down. Nobody else could have produced that sequence, unless the primary asset was compromised and is feeding us the phrase under duress. Yes, I said. That's the other option. The silence in the room had a different quality now. Not the performed silence of men deciding how to handle a woman. The operational silence of people who were very good at their jobs staring at a problem that was going to require all of them. Kowalski was in the room. He didn't look at me, but he was listening. I could tell by the way he held his coffee cup. Here's what I know, I said. The authentication has a distress variant. The contact used the clean variant. That means either they're safe, or they're a good enough actor to fool a protocol they helped design under no duress in a controlled setting. Which is possible, but it's not the most likely read. What's the most likely read? Ellis asked. They're scared, I said. They're scared and they're running out of time, and they're asking us to come get them. Ellis looked at the table for a long moment. Then, he said, we go in 40 hours. Kowalski finally looked at me, just for a second, and something in his face had shifted in a way I wasn't sure he was aware of. I looked back at the map. There was work to do. The 40 hours between the decision and the wheels up felt like something I could reach out and touch, like those hours had density, like they occupied physical space in the room, and you had to move carefully around them or risk knocking something loose. I used them the way I always use the hours before an operation, compulsively, productively, and with only brief interruptions for things like food and the illusion of sleep. Okafor found me at the map table at 2,200 hours. I'd been there for 3 hours, cross-referencing satellite imagery with street-level intelligence from a contact in Limassol who communicated exclusively in references to a specific brand of Greek cigarettes whose availability in different neighborhoods was, apparently, an extremely reliable proxy for human movement patterns. Don't ask me how this works. It works. He sat down across from me without asking, which I appreciated. I had worked with men who made a production of respecting your space so aggressively that the performance of it became its own intrusion. The breach approach, he said, and pulled the map toward him. He had large hands, the kind that made objects look slightly smaller, which I'd noticed was true of a lot of men in his line of work. This entry point, you flagged it. East service entrance. Lower thermal signature. Less likely to have eyes. Also bottlenecks at 12 meters. Yes, I said. But the alternative is the main approach through open ground, and the thermal drone puts at least 2 elevated positions on the northwest face. He studied the map for a moment. Then, he said, there's a drainage access here. He pointed. Comes out inside the compound wall. It's not on any official schematic. I looked at where he was pointing. How do you know that? Google Earth, 2019 imagery. Pre-renovation. They expanded the courtyard, which means they buried the old drainage channel, but they didn't fill it. Just capped it. I sat back, looked at him. You've been doing your own analysis. Since yesterday. He said it without any particular emphasis. Just a fact. Why didn't you bring this to Ellis? He met my eyes. Because I wanted to hear what you thought first. That was the moment I understood Daniel Okafor. Not fully. You never understand someone fully in 40 hours before an operation. But enough. He was the kind of person who made decisions about trust based on something more careful than rank or track record or gender. And whatever that calculus was, he had run it on me and arrived somewhere that mattered. I think I said slowly that if the drainage access holds, we put your breach team through first quiet entry, and I come in 40 seconds behind through the e-service door with the asset contact protocol already running. Split attention. If they're watching the east entrance, they're not watching the drain. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. Yeah, we should bring this to Ellis. We should, he agreed. But I wanted to know you'd thought of it independently. I hadn't, I admitted. You found the drain. You flagged the thermal problem that made the drain matter. He shrugged. Same thing. It wasn't the same thing. But I understood why he'd said it, and I let it stand. We brought it to Ellis at 23:30. He spent 20 minutes with it, brought in his deputy, brought in the mission planner, and by midnight we had a revised breach protocol that used both entry points in a 40-second stagger with communications coordination that was going to require every person involved to be operating at peak efficiency and not making a single mistake. Do not make a single mistake, Ellis said, which is the kind of thing commanders say when they want everyone to understand that the situation has fully arrived. I lay down at 0130, stared at the ceiling for 45 minutes. Thought about my mother, which I always do before operations, not because I'm afraid of dying, but because she's the person who taught me that fear is information, not instruction. Thought about the asset, a woman named Lena, or that was what I called her, her actual name buried under 6 layers of cover identity, who was sitting somewhere in a building on the eastern edge of a city, scared, transmitting cigarette availability data, waiting for someone to come. I thought about what it means to wait for someone to come. I fell asleep at 0220 and woke up at 0400 feeling the particular clarity that comes from insufficient sleep in high-stakes situations, which is not refreshing exactly, but is remarkably effective. Kowalski was at the equipment bay when I arrived for final prep. He was running a rig check with practiced efficiency, the kind of muscle memory that bypasses conscious thought entirely. I started my own check on the bench across from him. We didn't speak for about 10 minutes. Then, he said, the drainage approach. Okafor's find, I said. Ellis says it changes the whole breach geometry. It does. Another silence. I ran the comms check on my earpiece, tested the frequency, confirmed the encryption handshake. Nicosia, he said. The safe house conversation. That was 18 months ago. 19, I said. But yes. You were alone in there. Asset contact protocols require. That's not what I asked. I looked up. He was looking at me. Not the way he had in the briefing room. Not the performance of looking. Just looking. Yes, I said. I was alone. He nodded. Went back to his rig check. And then, without looking up, without any particular ceremony, I was out of line yesterday. I kept running my check. Yes. I say things to new team members. I know what you were doing, I said. And I know why. And it doesn't change the fact that it was out of line. He was quiet for a moment. Fair. Thank you for saying it. He nodded. We finished our checks in a silence that had changed quality entirely. No longer the absence of conversation, but the presence of something that didn't need words yet. Torres came in at 0430 with an energy that suggested he had slept extremely well and was personally offended that the world had forced him awake so early. He was eating from a bag of pretzels that he had somehow sourced from somewhere on the base at 4:30 in the morning, which told you everything you needed to know about Torres. "Reyes," he said, dropping onto the bench beside me with the casual ease of someone who had already made up his mind about you. "You know the layout of this building? The one we're going into? Better than anyone in this room." "Good." He offered me a pretzel. I took it, because I have a system. When I'm going somewhere for the first time, I pick someone who knows it, and I basically follow them everywhere, and I pretend I knew where I was going the whole time. Works great. Nobody ever notices. "That is not comforting information about your operational capacity," I said. "It's very comforting to me," he said cheerfully. Okafor appeared at 0445, and the fourth member of our immediate working group, a woman named Petty Officer Second Class Daniela Voss, communication specialist, who had said approximately 11 words to me since I arrived, and every single one of them had been precise and useful, finished her equipment check, and looked around at the four of us with the expression of someone who has been told she is on the interesting team and is reserving judgment. "Briefs in 10, she said. "Briefs in 10, Torres agreed. "You're eating pretzels," she observed. "Would you like some?" "Yes." She took several. "Thank you." This, I was learning, was how the people who were genuinely good at this work operated. Not with the performed bravado of the briefing room, with something quieter and more durable, a kind of pragmatic warmth that treated other people as useful and worth feeding and worth listening to because you were about to go somewhere dangerous together, and pretending otherwise was not a strategy. The final brief was at 0500. Ellis ran it clean and fast because there was nothing to add that hadn't already been said, and the people in the room were professionals. Wheels up at 0700. 40 minutes in the air. 40-minute approach window from the insertion point. We would be at the compound by local midnight, which was chosen because the asset's last transmission had used a phrase that in the cigarette code meant the building's overnight security rotation left a 90-minute window between 2330 and 0100. 90 minutes. I had worked in tighter windows. I had also worked in wider ones, and I was not going to pretend that 90 minutes wasn't giving me something to think about. On the aircraft, the dynamic was different than I expected. There is something about the interior of a military transport at altitude that equalizes people in a way that briefing rooms don't. Maybe it's the noise, or the cold, or the fact that everyone is sitting in the same uncomfortable harnesses, staring at the same dark floor. Kowalski sat 2 seats down from me, and at one point, turbulence, a hard drop, the kind that makes your stomach remind you it exists, reached out instinctively and grabbed the support bar next to me. Just steady reflex. Not pointed at me. Just the body's honest response to physics. We looked at each other and didn't say anything. Torres fell asleep. I genuinely don't know how he did it. Voss had her comms kit open and was running quiet diagnostics. Okafor was still, eyes closed, not asleep. I could tell by his breathing, doing whatever Okafor did in the space before things got very real. I reviewed the contact protocol one more time. The authentication phrases, the distress variants, the abort codes. The face I would be looking for. The name I would use. The 2 sentences in dialect that would tell Lena immediately that I was who I said I was and she could move. I had practiced those 2 sentences so many times they had stopped sounding like language and started sounding like breathing. The insertion was clean, a pitch-black beach landing with no one waiting for us, which is the best possible kind of beach landing. We moved inland fast and quiet, and what struck me immediately was the quality of silence from the team. Not the absence of sound. There was sound. Footsteps on packed earth, the whisper of tactical gear, the controlled exhale of people moving with purpose. But it was disciplined silence, intentional, the sound of people who understood that noise in a foreign city at midnight is information given to the wrong people. I moved with them and felt, for the first time, cleanly without the background noise of the briefing room or Kowalski's jaw or Yates's careful observation, what it actually felt like to be embedded, to be part of it, to have your breathing sync with the breathing of the people around you without deciding to let it happen. It's a strange thing to describe. It feels like being part of a sentence that's being spoken by something larger than you. The approach to the compound took 22 minutes. We found the drainage access exactly where Okafor's 2019 Google Earth image had placed it, and he had been correct. It was capped but not filled, the concrete cover worn enough at the edges to lift without equipment. He looked at me when they confirmed it. Just for a second. I gave him nothing externally but filed it precisely. Then we set the breach. Okafor and his team went through the drain at 2,347 hours. I waited 40 seconds. They were the 40 longest seconds of the operation. Then I moved to the e-service door, Voss on my left running comms, Torres covering our 6. I ran the entry approach. The door had a lock that my intelligence had correctly identified as electronic with a mechanical failsafe. Voss cracked the electronic in 8 seconds. I handled the mechanical in 4, which was faster than I'd managed in any of the 3 rehearsals because apparently my hands work better when there are real stakes, and I will never fully understand that about myself. We were inside. The building was quiet in the way that buildings are quiet when something has recently changed. Not peaceful quiet, holding its breath quiet. Okafor's voice in my earpiece. We're clear to the secondary corridor. 1 contact neutralized. Non-lethal, east stairwell. 2 minutes to target floor. Copy, I said and moved. The target floor was the 3rd. The room was at the end of a hallway that smelled like plaster and institutional cleaning solution and something else, fear, maybe, or just the accumulated tension of days spent waiting in a small space for something to change. I'd smelled it before. You learn to recognize it. I reached the door. I knocked 3 times, then twice. The pattern that meant nothing to anyone watching, but everything to Lena. Silence. My heart was doing something technically impressive. Then, from inside, a sound. Not words. Just breath, close to the door. I said the 2 sentences. The ones I'd practiced until they stopped sounding like language. A lock turned. The door opened. And the woman on the other side, small, exhausted, wearing 3 days of tension on her face like a second skin, looked at me for a moment with something that was too large to fit into a single word, and then said in her language, something that translated approximately as, I knew it would be a woman. I told them. Nobody listens. I almost laughed. I didn't because we had a corridor to clear and a 90-minute window that was now down to 40. But I almost did. Can you move? I said. I've been ready to move for 3 days, she said. Then let's go. We moved. And for 11 minutes, it was almost exactly according to plan. Then Torres's voice in my earpiece said contact in the particular tone he used for that word that I had heard exactly once before during a rehearsal. And even in rehearsal, it had made something in my chest go cold and quiet. How many? Okafor. 3 at the south exit. Armed. They weren't on the rotation. Copy. Alternative extraction. Voss. North access is clean. Longer route. Add 6 minutes. We don't have 6 minutes. Kowalski, who I hadn't realized was on this net, said from somewhere I couldn't immediately locate. Then, we make 6 minutes, I said. There was a half-second pause that in military communication terms is a very long pause. And then Kowalski said, copy that, Reyes. Walk us through it. I looked at the corridor. I looked at the building schematic I had memorized. I thought about what I knew about the contact positions, the window, the timeline, and a woman named Lena who had been waiting 3 days and was not, I had decided, going to spend a 4th. The maintenance shaft on the 2nd floor, I said. It runs parallel to the north corridor. Voss, do you have eyes on the north access from your current position? Negative, but I can get there in 90 seconds. Go. Torres, when she signals clear, you bring us through. And the south contacts. Okafor said. Kowalski, I said. How many people do you need to make 3 armed contacts, not a problem, for 4 minutes? Another pause. Then 2. You have 2. Keep it quiet. Copy. I looked at Lena. She was watching me with the particular attention of someone who had survived long enough to become a very accurate reader of rooms. We're going through a maintenance shaft, I told her. Is that as unpleasant as it sounds? Probably, I said, but it gets you home. She looked at me. Then, I have no complaints. We moved. The next 4 minutes were the kind of 4 minutes that, when you're in them, feel like they're happening to someone else, like you've stepped slightly outside your own body, and are watching from a remove that is protective and slightly unreal. Your hands do what they've been trained to do. Your voice stays level. You count footsteps and doorways and seconds in a part of your brain that runs parallel to the rest of you. The maintenance shaft was exactly where the schematic said it would be. Lena went through without a word. which told me more about her than a full intelligence report. Voss cleared the north access at 92 seconds, 2 seconds over her estimate, which she apologized for afterward in the most quietly professional way I have ever witnessed. We reached the extraction point at 0031 hours. For minutes outside the window. But we reached it, and, standing at the perimeter, gear up, covering our approach with the particular stillness of someone who had finished whatever he needed to finish and was ready to be somewhere else, was Kowalski. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But when we passed him, he fell in on my left flank without being asked, like it was exactly where he'd always planned to be. We extracted clean. The beach was still dark and cold and empty when we reached it, which was the second best possible version of the beach. The best version would have been warm. But I have learned not to ask for everything. On the transport back, Lena sat beside me and fell asleep on my shoulder within about 10 minutes, which I took as the highest possible professional compliment. Torres was awake again somehow, offering what remained of his pretzels to anyone who wanted them. Voss was logging the extraction timeline with the focused expression of someone who considers accurate record-keeping a form of respect for the people involved. Okafor was doing his not-sleeping thing, and Kowalski sat across from me and, after a while, said, "The maintenance shaft. You knew the shaft was there. I'd memorized the schematic. Everyone memorized the schematic. I memorized the parts everyone else stopped memorizing." He thought about that. "Why?" he said, not challenging. Actually asking. "Because the parts everyone stops memorizing," I said, "are usually the parts that matter when nothing goes according to plan." He was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that I thought he'd decided to let it go. Then he said, "That's the smartest thing I've heard on an op in about 3 years." I looked out the window at the dark sea below us. "I know," I said, and I let myself feel the 45 seconds of something that was close enough to joy that the difference didn't matter. We landed back at Coronado at 0614, just as the sun was making its reluctant appearance over the Pacific, painting the water the color of something that hadn't made up its mind yet. I remember that color. I keep it filed somewhere precise in the back of my mind because some images earn permanent storage, and that morning earned it. Lena was taken immediately by the debrief team, gently, professionally, with the practiced efficiency of people who understood that the person they were receiving had been through something. And when she turned and found me across the tarmac and held my gaze for about 3 seconds. No words, just that. It was enough. It was more than enough. The formal debrief began at 0800 and ran for 4 hours, which is standard for a mission of that complexity, and which I have always found to be one of the stranger experiences of military life. The fact that you go somewhere and do something and then immediately have to describe going somewhere and doing something while the events are still warm in your body, and your hands haven't entirely stopped remembering what they were doing at 0031 hours in a corridor in the dark. I described the maintenance shaft decision in detail. Ellis asked me 3 follow-up questions, all of them good. At one point, he looked at the rest of the team and said, "Anything to add?" And Torres said the pretzels were also mission critical, and the debrief room, which had been running at maximum professional density for 3 hours and 40 minutes, exhaled in a way that was less laughter and more a collective release of pressure. Even Ellis almost smiled. Afterward, I sat in the empty debrief room for a few minutes. Just sat. My legs were doing that thing they do when your body has been running on operational chemistry for 20 hours and is now politely asking to stop. Okafor put his head in the door. "You should eat," he said. "I know. The mess is doing eggs." "I know." He came in and sat down across from me. He had this quality, and I've met maybe 4 or 5 people in my life who have had it, of being present without requiring anything from you, of sitting in a room with you without filling it. "You did well," he said, and it was such a simple thing that it almost broke something in me that had been holding very carefully for about 48 hours. "We did well," I said. He shook his head just slightly. "You did well specifically. The rest of us did well generally. There's a difference." He looked at the table. "What you knew, the schematic, the authentication, the dialect, the contact, the shaft, none of that was available to anyone else in that room." He looked up. "You should know that it was seen." I thought about the briefing room, the laughter, Kowalski's voice. I thought about 45 seconds of crying with the door closed. It didn't feel like it was being seen, I said carefully. No, he agreed. It usually doesn't feel like that at the start. He stood up. Eggs. Eggs, I said. The mess hall at 1,200 hours was loud and smelled like scrambled eggs and institutional coffee and the particular brand of relief that communities of people generate after something has gone well. Someone had pulled the tables into an informal cluster, and there's a version of the debrief happening naturally, the way it always does, the real debrief, not the one with Ellis and the recording equipment, but the one where people tell each other what it actually felt like. Torres was holding court at the center table. I arrived in time to hear him explaining, at some length and with extensive physical demonstration, the structural integrity of the drainage access, which he had not personally gone through, but had strong feelings about. Voss was beside him, eating with focused efficiency and occasionally correcting his account with the particular deadpan precision of someone who was there and would like the record to reflect what actually happened. Kowalski was at the end of the table. He saw me come in, and he didn't look away. I got food, sat down 2 seats from him. There was a beat, just a beat, and then he moved his tray over and closed the gap. The South contacts, I said. Non-lethal, he confirmed. They'll have headaches. Good. It's usually not my preference. I know. I looked at him. Thank you for making it your preference last night. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you knew what you were doing. The whole time. Didn't you? It wasn't really a question. But I answer it like one. Not the whole time, I said. There were about 12 seconds in that corridor where I genuinely wasn't sure. But yes, mostly the 12 seconds. When Lena opened the door, I said. For 12 seconds I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if the authentication was coerced, and this is a setup, and I have just walked the entire team into a compromised extraction? What changed it? She looked at me, I said, and she looked tired in the specific way that people look when they've been waiting for something real. Not afraid, not performing, just tired and ready. Kowalski nodded slowly. He had his coffee cup again, and he was holding it in the same way he'd held it in the briefing room, but his face was doing something entirely different. I read your file, he said. Last night, before Wheels Up. I looked at him. Took me 2 hours, he said, because some of it is redacted, and I had to read around the edges. He met my eyes. The citation from the Karengal Valley. The one Colonel Dillon put you in for. The Karengal Valley citation was not something I discussed. Not with anyone, really, and certainly not with people I'd known for 72 hours. Yes, I said. There were 6 people in that valley, he said. 4 of them came out. Yes. And the reason they came out, Kowalski, I said. He stopped. Thank you for reading it, I said. But I'd rather you judge me on last night. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Fair, he said. Then let me say this. He put down his coffee cup. Last night was the best advisory support I've seen embedded on a SEAL operation. And I've been running these ops for 11 years. The mess hall was loud around us. Torres was now apparently doing a full physical reenactment of the drainage approach using a fork and 2 coffee cups. Voss had given up correcting him and was watching with the expression of someone who has chosen peace. I was out of line in that briefing room, Kowalski said. Not just out of line. Wrong. About what you were. About what you could do. He picked up his coffee. I don't say that to a lot of people. I know, I said. How do you know? Because I read people, I said. It's literally my job. Something happened in his face then. Not quite a smile, but the structural precondition for one. Fair, he said. Torres materialized at my elbow. Reyes. Quick question. If we did this again, hypothetically, and I said I want to be on your team, would you take me? You're already on my team, I said. You've been on my team since you offered me a pretzel. He pointed at me. That's exactly the right answer. He looked at Kowalski. See? This is what operational instinct looks like. Go away, Torres, Kowalski said. Going, said Torres. He went. The formal recognition came 3 days later. I wasn't expecting it. I never expect things like that. Not because I don't think I deserve them, but because the machinery of recognition in institutional settings has its own momentum and timeline, and I've learned that expecting it to sync with your actual experience is a reliable way to spend a lot of time frustrated. Commander Ellis called me into his office at 0900. It was a different kind of office than I expected from him. Books on the shelves, a photograph of a desert landscape that was either southern Utah or somewhere in the Sinai, and I didn't ask a single succulent on the windowsill that looked like it had survived considerable neglect and was quietly proud of itself. Operation Glasswall is being written up as a success, he said. The asset is secure. The network is intact. The intelligence obtained from the secondary materials recovered from the safe house is, he paused, choosing a word, significant. Good, I said. Your role in the mission outcome is being formally documented. He folded his hands on his desk. Beyond the standard advisory language. I appreciate that. Beyond that, he said, I have a request. From the team. He looked at me carefully. Alpha rotation is going back out in 6 weeks. Different region. Different parameters. CENTCOM is asking for an enhanced advisory embed. Someone who can operate as an integrated team member rather than a consultant. I looked at him. The request, he said, came from the team collectively, which is unprecedented. This is not how SEAL teams request advisors. They don't. Advisors are assigned. He picked up a single sheet of paper and held it briefly, not handing it to me, just acknowledging its existence. There are signatures on this request from every member of Alpha Rotation. Every member. Kowalski, I said. Kowalski drafted the request. Ellis put the paper down. I'll need your answer within 48 hours, but I want you to know that my recommendation to CENTCOM is favorable. I thought about 45 seconds of crying with the door closed. I thought about 2 sentences practiced until they stopped sounding like language. I thought about a woman named Lena, tired and ready, who said she knew it would be a woman. I don't need 48 hours, I said. I found Okafor afterward in the equipment bay. He was running a rig check. Again, or still, it was hard to tell with Okafor. Ellis told you, he said. Not a question. He did. I sat down on the bench across from him. The request. You signed it. I did. Why didn't you tell me? He ran the buckle on his chest rig, checked the release twice, ran it again. Because I didn't want you to feel like it was, he paused, searching for the word, a gesture. It's not a gesture. You belong on this team. That's a factual statement. The paper just makes it official. I looked at him for a moment. Okafor, I said. Reyes. When you asked to have me on your breach team. The morning after the briefing room. He looked up. You didn't know me, I said. You'd seen me for maybe 4 hours. You'd watch me not react to Kowalski. Yes. Why? He thought about this. Put down the rig. Because I've been on a lot of teams, he said. And I've watched a lot of people get told they don't belong. And I've learned to tell the difference between people who fall and people who file it. He met my eyes. You filed it. I didn't quite trust my voice for a moment. So I waited. Also, he said, with the particular timing of someone who understands how to deploy humor precisely, you were the only person in the briefing room taking notes, which suggested to me that you were there to work. And I find it useful in colleagues. I was shaking, I said. My hands were shaking. I know, he said. I noticed. You noticed. I noticed most things, he said, without any particular pride in it. Just fact. Your hands shook and you took notes anyway. That's not weakness, Reyes. That's the whole thing. That's everything. The equipment bay was quiet around us. Outside, the Pacific was doing something that involved sun and wind in proportions that were, for once, almost pleasant. Through the high window, I could see a slice of it, gray-blue and moving, constant, unbothered. I'm coming back, I said. I know, he said. 6 weeks. We'll be here. I picked up my jacket, stood, and then, because something was warranted and because Okafor was the kind of person you could say real things to without them becoming something else. Thank you. For the drain. For the request. For the eggs. He almost smiled. It was a small thing, but it was real. That's what teams are for, he said. The day I flew out of Coronado, the whole of Alpha Rotation was in the yard doing PT, running, by the look of it, which is what SEAL teams do in their spare time when they're not doing things that are far too dangerous to mention to your mother. I was heading to the transport in a vehicle with Yates, who was driving with the quiet competence of a man who had ferried a great many people to a great many transports and had long ago made peace with the nature of his role. I saw them through the window as we drove past. 267 men, running in formation in the November light. And as our vehicle passed, I don't know who started it, whether it was Okafor or Torres or Voss or someone I hadn't even properly met. The formation began to slow, and then to stop, and then, one by one, the whole of it came to attention. Not all at once. Not snapping to, like a parade drill, but something quieter and more deliberate, a wave of stillness that moved through the formation the way the noticing had moved through the briefing room 3 days ago, only this time in the other direction. This time it was something that said, "We see you. We know what this is. We're saying so." I watched it through the window. Yates didn't say anything. He was very good at his job. I watched 267 men stand at attention as our vehicle drove past, and I thought about the woman in the briefing room 3 days ago who had written a date at the top of a page and kept her voice level and did not shake where anyone could see. And I thought about whether she would have believed this if you had told her. I thought she probably would not. I thought she might have been wrong about that. 3 weeks later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No letteridad. The return address was a zip code I recognized as the San Diego area, and the handwriting was large and slightly aggressive in the way that handwriting tends to be when the person is not accustomed to writing letters and is making a specific effort. It said, "Captain Reyes, I've been trying to figure out the correct thing to write in this letter for approximately 12 days. I keep getting it wrong, so I'm going to just say the thing. I was wrong about you before I met you, and right about you after, and I think the second thing matters more than the first. You made us better. That's not nothing. That's actually most of it. Kowalski P.S. Torres wants you to know that he is keeping the pretzels going as a team tradition in your honor. This is either a compliment or a burden. Probably both. I read it twice. Put it down. Picked it up and read it again. Then I added it to the folder where I keep the things I don't want to lose. The folder that has, in it, a single piece of paper with a date written at the top. The morning of the briefing room. The morning I walked in and chose to stay. I've been asked since then what it was like, being the first, doing the thing nobody expected, walking into a room that wasn't built for you and sitting down in it anyway. I always say the same thing. It wasn't about the room. The room is where people perform, where they say the things they've decided to say and react the way they've been trained to react and decide in advance who deserves to be there and who doesn't. The room is where Kowalski said what he said, and the laughter moved through the space like weather. The real thing, the thing that actually mattered, happened in a dark corridor in a building in a city in the dark when I knocked on a door and said 2 sentences and listened for something on the other side. And on the other side, a woman said she knew it would be a woman, and a lock turned. And that was it. That was everything. The rest, the request, the signatures, the formation standing at attention in November light. That was just the world catching up to a thing that had already happened. A thing that happened in a moment of quiet between 2 sentences and a turning lock. I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to do the work in the spaces no one is watching. To study the parts of the schematic everyone else stops studying. To practice the sentences until they stop sounding like language. To keep your hands moving even when they're shaking. To file the things that hurt instead of letting them land. Lena is safe. I can't say anything more than that, which you'll understand. Okafor is preparing for the next rotation. He texted me last week a photograph of a drainage access that he had found in the satellite imagery of an upcoming target area, with no caption. Just the image. I texted back a single thumbs up, which I think communicated everything adequately. Torres is maintaining the pretzel tradition, according to the last report. Voss made Master Chief. I heard it through channels and sent a message that said, "Accurate record keeping is a form of respect." She sent back, "Learned it from the best." I'm choosing to believe she meant me. And me, I'm in the team bay at 0415, running gear checks in the quiet while the sun is still deciding what to do with itself, and the Pacific is still being cold and indifferent and constant, the way it always is, the way it always will be. I'm already there. I'm always already there. Because that's the only way you stay.